On today's episode, we are going to be diving really deep into what went wrong for Team Canada at the 2025 World Junior Championships.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And today we have a very interesting episode here for you in store, as we'll be breaking down what went wrong for Team Canada at the World Juniors. And spoiler alert, there was quite a lot, but I think that there's a pretty clear direction here that we'll be taking and diving into some stats, some numbers, some performances in both the group stage and in that fatal elimination game against Czechia. And we'll be diving in the second segment to the impact that player selection had, as well as a complete ignorance of existing strengths and chemistry within the squad. And in the final segment, we'll be wrapping up the show by looking at the impact that coaching stubbornness and coaching mistakes had on this team. I'm Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects, typically joined by Hattie Kalakesh, but it is a solo episode for me here today. But before we jump into the show, and there's so much to talk about, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So let's start off with the baseline here, and that is the games that Canada played in this tournament. They played in 5 games, and there were 2 shutouts in there that I guess were the good performances for Team Canada here. But even in those games, there was a lot that they were banking on bouncing in their direction. And those games were even quite shaky at times. The first game of the tournament for Team Canada came against Team Finland in the group stage on Boxing Day. And that was a 4-0 victory for the Canadians. There was a lot to like here, including a fantastic shutout performance for Carter George, and a couple decent goals as well. You saw some flashes of offense in this game for Team Canada. Gavin McKenna scored his lone goal in the tournament. Matthew Schaefer played a fantastic game and added an empty net goal at the end. And both Easton Cowan and Luca Pinelli also scored. But this was kind of the end of the honeymoon phase for this team at this tournament, because there is a lot to still learn in terms of learning experience beyond this. And there was a true wake-up call the following day against Team Latvia. This game that we've talked about already quite a lot. I mean, it is a monumental thing that Team Latvia was able to beat Canada for the first time ever in tournament history, 3-2, with that fantastic performance for Leonards Fellbergs. And of course, in that shootout, and Eric Matejko had a fantastic game, but Canada just could not put the puck in the net. And it was a great goaltending performance for Jack Ivankovic as well in the Canadian net. And he was the reason they were able to make it all the way to the shootout. And he stopped 7 consecutive shootout attempts for Team Latvia, but Canada couldn't get a single one of those into the back of the Latvian net. And the game ended 3-2 in the shootout. Then Canada won 3-0 to Germany, which looks quite convincing on the outside. But for those of us who watched the game, know it was anything but. It was a narrow 1-0 lead that was held for 40 minutes in this game. Canada scored the first goal about 10 minutes into the first period, and were hanging on for dear life to not concede one to the Germans. And it was a really shaky performance that ended up with a victory for the Canadians, but certainly not the emphatic display that both the team itself and fans had been hoping for following that Latvian defeat. And then the losses continued to come. Team USA, one of the best teams at this tournament. It's them and Sweden that have been just consistently excellent so far through these games. And even though the US did lose that one game to Finland, they haven't had nearly as many, I guess, hurdles as Team Canada did. And their coaching and player selection and overall chemistry and the team display, rather than just individual flashes, has just been so much more cohesive than it was at any point in this tournament for the Canadians. And of course, the States won that game 4-1 with a strong third period display, where Canada just could not make up that gap. It was a 2-1 game for a while, but they lost. Then finally came the elimination game in the quarterfinals. And for a second consecutive year, Canada was knocked out by the Czechs. And this was a game. This was a game. I mean, Team Canada did not play well. They outshot Czechia 32-26, but they took a lot of penalties, spent a lot of time on the penalty kill, and ended up being unable to outscore Czechia, and were the victims of a just complete dominant third period here for the Czechs, where they scored 3 goals and only conceded 1, and ended up scoring the winner with just 43 seconds remaining in the third period. And that is how the tournament ended for Team Canada. I think most people that are listening to this episode have watched this tournament and have seen this display happen for Team Canada. So let's delve a little bit more into the numbers. And the numbers here, I think, highlight a very consistent element, and that is that Canada was unable to score goals. And we'll dive into a bit more of the why of that in the following segments. But let's actually look at these numbers real quick. Canada had a 6.34 shooting percentage at this tournament. That is a lot lower than a good team at this tournament would hope to have, and is something that could really sink a team. And while that number does indicate a lack of puck luck, I think a lot of what supports that is the decisions that were made in forming this team, such as bringing a lot of checking forwards rather than true creative game-breaking skill that they had available to them in selection and decided not to take with them. And the shooting percentage, I think, is a real reflection of the lack of offensive punch that this team had, that had been available to them if they had wanted it. We also have to look at the special teams here, because Canada lost the special teams battle at the World Junior Championships quite convincingly. Their penalty kill was only a 74.07%, and considering that so much of the effort was brought in bringing in penalty kill specialists and defensive checking intense wingers especially, but also on the defensive side, bring more defensively minded pieces that don't bring as much moving forward, but are supposed to be those shutdown penalty killers. It didn't really work at this tournament. 21% on the power play. Also, I mean, not very good. That's, I mean, NHL average. And at this tournament, you often see teams going 30, 40% on the power play when they have these elite level talents at forward. And that means that overall on special teams, Canada was at a 95.12, which is well below the 105, 110, 115% that elite teams often look to get, even in the NHL, but especially at a tournament like the World Junior Championship, where the skill gap is so large. And it was, more numbers that I think really reflect the lack of offensive punch and also the ineffectiveness of the strategy that I was taken in terms of keeping out chances. And I mean, Canada also took a lot of penalties at this tournament, so they found themselves in the box very often. And with the penalty kill that just wasn't very strong, that hurt them very consistently. Going back to the lack of offensive punch, there were only 2 players on this team that scored even 3 points in 5 games. That is not enough. Those 2 players were Easton Cowan and Braden Yeager. And with 3 points in 5 games, they led the team in scoring. And I think that is a crux of what the problem was here. The puck just wasn't going in, and there was a lack of any real determination to change that, whether it be having practices or putting more skilled players on with more ice time up in the lineup. I mean, guys like Porter Martone and Carson Raycop and Gavin McKenna could all really spark the offense. And even a player that had been playing a lot on the first line saw relatively limited minutes. Bradley Nadeau, the only player on this team playing professional hockey this season who didn't quite find his groove at this tournament, was also only averaging 15 minutes a night. Canada was really giving a lot more minutes to a lot more of the checking wingers, and a lot of that goal-scoring punch was lost on the bench. And even Porter Martone only got into 3 games, averaging 11 minutes and 17 seconds a night. And overall at this tournament, Canada scored 13 goals and conceded 11. The problems are clear here, and a lot of those goals came in 2 shutout victories over Finland and Germany. If you take the other 3 games that had all been losses against Latvia and Czechia and the USA, Canada was outscored 11-6. So in those important games and against some teams that had a lot less depth and a lot less talent than Canada, with the exception of the United States. Canada just could not score, and they were conceding goals that they probably shouldn't have, and conceding a lot of chances they probably shouldn't have. And that is not to say that any of the blame deserves to be on the goaltending, because the goaltending was fantastic at this tournament for Team Canada. Both Jack Ivankovic and Carter George were solid in the crease. Ivankovic played 65 minutes. He had that entire game against Latvia, and he had a .923 save percentage against Latvia, and they still could not win the game. Carter George, for his part, played in the other 4 games, and he had a .936 save percentage. He was fantastic. He had shutouts. Even in the games that Canada lost that he started, he played really, really good hockey, and just very consistently positioned, keeping high danger chances to the outside, sealing his post really well. He's so intelligent, really mobile as well. A lot to like with the goaltending performances here, but I think it really does speak volumes that even with elite netminding and a truly ridiculous depth of talent in the Canadian field that they could have brought to the World Juniors this year, Canada could not score and were conceding a lot of goals because the defense was not doing a very good job at sealing off chances, which was the reason that many of those players were brought, was to limit chances against. And there's also really limitation in offense coming from the blue line, which could have been changed by a player like Zane Parekh or Carter Yakimchuk, but we'll be diving into that in the next segment, talking about player selection, the underdog mentality that Canada seemed to adopt at this tournament, as well as the ignorance of existing chemistry and strength of the players on this team among the coaching staff. But before we jump into that, a quick message from our sponsors over at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season off strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a dub. I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. It's absolutely thrilling. What's even more fun, in my opinion, is guessing how many interceptions a team is going to catch in a certain game, as well as a variety of more niche stats and things that you can take your big swings on. Whether you're going to take those swings on the NFL and American football or on European football in the Champions League, the choice really is up to you. And of course, if you prefer tennis or golf, or of course hockey, the choice is always yours with FanDuel. You can take the swings on whatever sport interests you the absolute most. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Alrighty, let's dive right into the player selection here, because this has been the topic of the tournament so far for Canada. It was in the month heading into the tournament, and I believe it does remain the case now as well, with hindsight in our favor. The decision to leave elite skilled players at home, I think, is one that cannot be made again next year. You're going to have to see Canada bring their best players that can break games open. Team Canada at the World Junior Championships is not a team that should be built to win games 1 or 2 to nothing. This is a team that typically should be scoring a lot of goals, creating a lot of chances, playing open hockey, end-to-end hockey, where sure, you might concede 3 or 4 goals in a game, but you'll be scoring 6, 7, 8, 9, even 10 in a game. And we have not seen that kind of offensive performance from Canada at this tournament because they didn't really bring the personnel to play that style of hockey. They adopted an underdog mentality of playing checking, hard-nosed hockey against teams that were better at that style than they are. Teams like Latvia and Czechia play really hard-working hockey where they're constantly fighting at the boards and initiating contact, playing gritty style of play. And Canada brought players to play that style of game. Guys like Matthew Cataford and Luca Pinelli and Cole Baudouin, Tanner Howe, Ethan Gauthier, and Jet Luchenko are all players that are really good two-way players that can play hard-nosed hockey, initiating contact, really solid players that I think the vast majority of World Junior teams should be playing pretty important roles. But on Team Canada, when you bring those players, you are succumbing to playing the style of play of your opposition for most of these games. And it's why Team Canada struggled so much in the group stage as well. I mean, they finished below Latvia in the group stage because they were playing into their opponent's hands. They were not trying to take control of games or dominate possession or just creating a lot off the rush, taking risks, even if the puck were to go the other way, trusting your goaltender to mop things up when things get messy. The goaltending was good enough to do that at this tournament, but there just wasn't that impetus. And I think that bringing players like Beckett Seneca, the recent third overall pick, who has been fantastic in the OHL for the last 12 months and just dominating games, playing a really physical, hard-nosed style of play, high-end forechecking, good defensive work rate, and actually habits and intelligence on top of the elite level handling ability, the power game, the goal scoring skill, the playmaking. So much to love in this player who would have fit exactly into what kind of style Team Canada was playing, but Dave Cameron did not bring him. Michael Misa, elite level two-way center, would have probably been the smartest player on this team for Team Canada had they brought him, but they didn't. He would have played an important role in the top six, bring a lot of offense, a lot of playmaking, intelligent play, cycle offense, prioritizing possession as well, which clearly Dave Cameron would have liked from players that he would have brought, but he wasn't taken along. Michael Hage for transition offense and high-end skill, breaking games open when things get too constricted and when space is hard to come by. He was not brought to this tournament, and he's been the second best freshman in the NCAA this season behind James Higgins, who has been having a pretty good tournament for the States. Beyond that, you also have Zane Parekh and Carter Yakimchuk on the blue line, who could have brought significant offense and power play quarterbacking ability that was really, really lacked at this tournament for the Canadians. They started with Oliver Bonk in that role, and he's been playing bumper all season long with the London Knights, and that wasn't working. Ended up moving him into that bumper position and bring Sam Dickinson into that role, but none of those players are nearly as capable as Yakimchuk or Parekh are in that role. Ideally, Parekh, in my opinion, should have been a first-pairing defenseman at this tournament for the Canadians, but was not deemed good enough to be a seventh defenseman, or didn't fit the style of play, of course, that Team Canada was going for, because he isn't as big, but he does play with real violence. He's a gritty little player. He's a player I think would have fit really nicely into what Team Canada was trying to build here, but he wasn't brought along. Same thing with Andrew Crystal. Canada couldn't score goals. They couldn't manufacture elite, high-end scoring chances. Is there any player that Canada could have brought that they didn't that is a better playmaker than Andrew Crystal? No. Are there even like two or three players on the Canadian lineup that are better playmakers than Andrew Crystal? Also, no. So many players were snubbed from this roster that would have completely changed the look of this team, would have completely changed the way they played, would have completely changed the potency of both rush and cycle offense, as well as power play. Sure, the penalty kill probably wouldn't have been improved if these players had been brought along, but even if the penalty kill had been at a 70% instead of a 74%, the power play would have compensated more than enough to bring that total number from a 95 up over 100, in my opinion. And yeah, this was a comedy of errors, in my opinion, for Team Canada. So much went wrong. And as well as just ignoring existing strengths in the roster, existing chemistry. You're coming up against teams like the Americans that have players that have been playing together for 2, 3, even 4 years for some of them. And there's a really strong basis of chemistry, and Canada just completely ignored any pairings of chemistry in their lineup. Carson Rakoff and Porter Martone have been the most lethal pairing in the entire OHL this season, and yet those two players didn't play a single game in the same lineup, let alone on the same line. They were switching between each other as the 12th and 13th forwards for some reason, and decisions were made, and in my opinion, a significant amount of poor decisions were made. And I think a lot of this, as we'll be exploring in the next segment, comes down to stubbornness of the coach, specifically Dave Cameron, which is something that I saw a lot in my time watching the Ottawa 67s live for 2.5 years. Consistency in that regard in terms of stubbornness and no desire of learning from mistakes or adapting style of play to what is seen in a given tournament or given playoff series. And that killed Canada here. On top of that, not only did they not adapt, they completely killed any chances of adapting by canceling practices. But we'll be diving into that. We'll be continuing the rant a little bit in the final segment here. But first, a quick message from our sponsors over at Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That has definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was paying for anymore, and Rocket Money made it easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant looking out for my finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together into one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals that you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in cancels of subscriptions, saving members up to $740 every single year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features on the app is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. No more stressing about budgeting every single month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. All right, let's wrap up the show here and dive straight into coaching stubbornness and coaching mistakes, because in my opinion, those are the lessons to be taken from this tournament, and those were the things that decided the result for Team Canada here. Dave Cameron had, in my opinion, the worst display of a Team Canada coach in recent memory at this tournament. As we mentioned in the last segment, the player selection was very poor. The results throughout the group stage were very poor, whether it's goal scoring or penalty killing or even conceding goals despite high-end goaltending performances. So much was going wrong. And yet the solution that Dave Cameron decided on was to cancel consecutive practices before the quarterfinals, before the game against the United States. There were no practices had after the defeat to Latvia. Which makes zero sense. And you even had American coach Matt Carl come out in an interview following the Americans' victory in the quarterfinals, talking in depth about the minutia of what he does in his practices, why it's important his team practice, even when they're tired in these towards the tail end of this intense tournament. And Team Canada decided not to practice. If you ever want an argument of why practice is important and what impact it has on building a cohesive structure for the team, the importance that has in finding chemistry among your roster, among a myriad of other things of why practices are so crucial in winning games, especially in tournaments like the World Juniors, where you don't have existing chemistry in many cases among your players. This is your example. This is why you practice. It does not go well when you don't, and I think it's very arrogant not to. Sure, players are going to be tired, but these are the World Junior Championships. These are Canadian players that have been dreaming to be playing on this stage since they were 3-4 years old, and to cancel practices because they're tired, not even having like low intensity practices where you're doing more drills to improve chemistry rather than exerting yourself too intensely, is inexcusable in my eyes, and just did not function at all for the Canadians at this tournament. Of course, I think that the stubbornness of just consistently doubling down on what wasn't working is a really big reason of everything that went wrong here for Team Canada. Whether it was the stubbornness in not practicing, which is not a sentence I ever thought I would be saying on this podcast while discussing a team like Team Canada, or the stubbornness in the roster, not trying out very obvious combinations like Porter Martone and Carson Rakoff, or even bringing those kinds of combinations, like bringing Denver Barkey into this tournament. If Dave Cameron wanted to play Easton Cowan as much as he did, bringing Denver Barkey would have been the smartest decision he could have done in complementing him and building off of the chemistry they've been building in London for the last 3 years. This complete lack of accountability in the own mistakes and in learning from them throughout the tournament led exactly where it should have for Team Canada. This was something that I think a lot of people saw coming, especially after the Latvia game, that Canada would have real struggles against hard-nosed, more skilled opposition. like Team Czechia. And this isn't the strongest year for Team Czechia in terms of the players they have, but they played a cohesive style. They never let go of Team Canada, and they outplayed Canada at the game they chose to play, which was board game and intensity and checking. And Czechia did that fantastically well in this game, and they won it. And Canada did not deserve to move on to the semifinals. This was a truly horrific display for the Canadians, and I think a lot of lessons have to be learned here in terms of the coaches that Team Canada decides to bring to these tournaments, not just going with a coach that has previous experience with Team Canada. I mean, Dave Cameron won a tournament with the Canadians just a couple of years ago, and he has NHL experience as well with the Ottawa Senators. But in terms of the actual coaching ability, I don't think that Dave Cameron should be anywhere near this team, and they brought him along anyways. I think that bringing in a perhaps more modern approach that wants to use skill is a lot more adaptable in game and between games to learning from errors and learning from things that just don't work or don't function, and also leaning more towards chemistry, what already exists, and using what you have available to you. These are all things I think that a more forward-looking coach would do much, much better, that we've seen at this tournament other coaches do at a very, very high level. Beyond that, in terms of coaching mistakes, blaming the players at the end of the tournament in the post-game interviews, blaming their lack of dedication, I think is absurd. The mistakes here were so consistent on the coaching side, and to deflect the blame away from oneself towards the kids that you decided to bring to this tournament, the team that you constructed, the system that you put in place, and the style of play that you told them to play, while not giving them practices to actually give them reps in this system. The blame, in my opinion, is obvious. Not that blame is constructive in any way. I mean, Canada's out. Blaming the coach isn't going to change that reality in any way at all. But moving forward, the decisions made going into the tournament have to be a lot better. And that includes a player selection, too. Leaving home some of the most talented players in the nation just doesn't make any sense. It's not excusable, in my opinion. Sure, maybe one or two don't make the cut because you can't bring everyone, and Canada has so much talent like available to them. You can never bring every player that you think you should. But Seneca, Misa, Perek, those three players, Andrew, Crystal, those four players are among the absolute best players in the entire CHL this season and bring so much offensive value. Even when injuries came up for Team Canada and they were able to bring in more players into the lineup, they didn't choose to dig into that. When Matthew Schaefer went down, they brought in Sawyer Minio, who ended up playing 10 minutes a night on the third pairing, rather than perhaps bolstering the lineup and changing things a little bit by bringing a player like Perek, like Yakimchuk on the blue line to add on that power play as a quarterback to create offense from the blue line and mix things up a little bit, becoming a bit less predictable of just constantly going and dumping and chasing and losing those battles more often than not on the forecheck. This was a poor tournament for Team Canada. A lot went wrong, but I think that a lot of what did go wrong can be boiled down very, very clearly to the coaching errors. And yeah, I'm going to link down below in the description a fantastic article written by my colleague Mitch Brown over at Elite Prospects, also diving into Canada exiting the tournament, as well as the role that coaching played in that. And I think that wraps up the show for us here today. I believe I could be ranting for another hour at least from this point onwards about everything that should have been done differently for Team Canada. But we're running out of time here. Last thing I'm going to mention before we close out the show that I just found very perplexing and odd was that Dave Cameron decided to take credit for knowing how they would lose at the tournament in a very strange quote at that post-game press conference. Sure, I guess. I mean, I think you're wrong. I don't think you knew how you were going to lose. I think you lost because you couldn't score goals, and the entire strategy of play did not feed into your hand or what your strengths were. But sure, you predicted the loss. Good job on predicting going out in the quarterfinals of the World Junior Championships that was being hosted at home in Canada in the nation's capital. Yeah, that wraps things up here for us today. If you liked the episode, please like and subscribe. If you're listening on YouTube, leave us a comment of what you thought about this tournament for Team Canada, as well as perhaps the lineup that you would have brought, or some of the changes you have brought to the lineup, or the style of the structure of the team in the middle of the tournament when things were going catastrophically wrong already and changes just didn't end up being made. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please make sure to make us your first listen of the day. We always really appreciate our everydayers who tune in to our podcast, delving deep into the prospect world here. And of course, thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Sebastian Hai. I'm the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects, usually joined by Hadi Kalikesh. And we hope that you tune back in very soon for our Monday show as we continue our coverage for the month of January here in 2025. Another belated Happy New Year to you all. And hopefully those Canadian fans that are listening have recovered a little bit from this display at the tournament for Team Canada.